This video provides a walkthrough of the iSupe product with a focus on the Supervisor features. We'll start by going to www.isupelive.com and clicking the Login button. Here we'll enter our username and password for our Supervisor account. And log in. Next we'll want to create a session, so we'll click on the Create Session button. We'll enter a title for the session. And we can also enter a description for the session. Next we'll enter a start time for the session. iSupe will allow you to begin the session at any time, but this is just a reference time for your supervisee. And lastly, we'll choose a session password. iSupe will enforce strong password constraints to make sure security across the site is maintained. It's indicated that our session has been created successfully. Next we'll check to make sure that everything was entered correctly, so we see our title, description, and session start time. These are correct and we're ready to send an invite to our supervisee. Click on that button. We see our session ID and token have already been filled in for us. These are our session identifiers. Lastly, we'll enter a password if we wish to send over email to our supervisee. We can also choose to not enter that password here and maybe tell our supervisee in person for added security. When we're ready, we can enter the session. On the left side of the screen, we'll see our messages, that is, messages from the supervisor. In the middle of the screen, we'll see the time at which those messages were sent. It's a relative time, such as 2 minutes ago. That will be updated throughout the session. And on the right side of the screen, we'll see our supervisee messages. This is a familiar chat interface. We'll wait for our supervisee to join, and we see that they have joined. And we can go ahead and send them a message. We can do so by double-clicking in the chat window. This will bring up the Send Message dialog box. We could send any message that we like. In this demo, our conversation will be sped up slightly for the sake of demonstration. We'll wait for the supervisee to indicate that he or she is ready to begin. And we'll watch the session. Typically this is done over video or behind a one-way mirror. Now the supervisee has indicated that they need some help. We may want to reassure them that they're doing fine and provide some advice. You'll also notice that we can send a message of normal priority or high priority. In this case, we'll enter the message as high priority to call attention to this message. And we'll watch and see how they do with that advice. The supervisees indicated that they've received that message. And when we see that they have done a good job, we can send a message that praises and encourages them. We can also change the status of previous messages. That high priority message is no longer high priority, so we can change it back to normal priority so that attention is no longer called to that particular message. We do that by clicking on the message and following the change status dialog. Now we can jump in at any time and provide additional encouragement or advice to our supervisee. Here we'll send another high priority message with a directive for our supervisee. And the supervisee has indicated that they'd like some clarification, so we'll provide some clarification. You'll notice here that we'll code the client's name. We won't use their actual name, any identifying information. That's very important. This provides just an additional layer of security. And the supervisee has indicated that they've received that message. Now we'll talk about a feature called the invisible message feature. In iSupe, you can designate a message to be invisible. What that means is that the message will not be sent to the supervisee during the session. It will be saved as part of the session transcript, however. So that allows the supervisor and the supervisee to see this note in the session transcript later, with a timestamp attached to it for post-session review. This may be something that we don't want to confuse the supervisee during the session, but maybe wish to talk with them about later. It's worth noting that all of the messages that are sent using iSupe are sent using 128-bit public-private key encryption. This encryption scheme is commonly referred to as SSL, stands for Secure Socket Layer. And this is an industry standard security measure. Messages are also stored in a secure database. and the messages are stored temporarily. When our session's complete, we'll click the back button in the chat interface, and we're brought back to what's commonly known as the lobby screen. When we go to leave the session, we're prompted. This indicates that if we were to actually close the session, that all the data associated with that session will be purged from the database. Perhaps we're not ready to do that yet, and so we just leave the session rather than closing it. Later, when we're ready to close the session, we can rejoin it. You can download the transcript. Before actually closing the session. Transcripts are produced in PDF format. We'll take a look at our sample transcript here. You notice the times have been translated to absolute times rather than relative times, and messages are color-coded. And if you remember our invisible message from before that the supervisee never saw, that's included as part of this transcript. So now if we send the transcript to the supervisee, they will see that message, and we could talk about that in one-on-one supervision, for example. Now that we're ready to leave the session, we can actually close it, and the messages will be purged from the database. When we're finished, we always want to remember to log out. This concludes this video.